subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow our page on Facebook. Again, we would like to welcome you all to the Filipino Science Hub. For those who are new and may not be familiar with FilSciHub, we would like to share who we are and what we do in the next few minutes. So Filipino Science Hub is an online platform founded by our CEO, Filipino scientist Dr. Jeffrey Camacho Bunking back in 2012. Currently, it is a registered nonprofit organization based in Houston, Texas, United States. Our main mission is to promote STEM education and the culture of research among students and teachers in the Philippines and even around the world. Our FilSciHub global leadership team is comprised of volunteer Filipino scientists and seasoned STEM educators from different parts of the world. So what is our vision? Well, we would like to see a technology and innovation-driven Philippines, and we believe that this can be achieved by creating a new generation of well-rounded Filipino STEM enthusiasts. So this vision is being carried out through our two major programs, the Filipino Science Hub Ed program and the Filipino Science Hub Research University. With FilSciHub Ed, we are able to empower and support our teachers when it comes to strengthening the STEM education in the country. Well, this is an important endeavor because if our STEM teachers are well equipped in teaching STEM fundamentals, then there will be a higher probability of having young students who would want to pursue STEM careers through the inspiration of their teachers. But we know that a STEM culture is not complete without the actualization of STEM theories. So students will need to practice what they learn. And this is why we also have the FilSciHub Research University. Through this program, we provide fundamentals of research training for our high school students and teachers. Also, through FilSciHub Research University, we are able to bring practicing scientists closer to our students and teachers. So here at FilSciHub, we are all educators and practicing scientists. And up to date, we have been able to reach over 70,000 STEM educators and students globally. And we know that this will continue to grow in the years to come. So we are all excited about what is in store at FilSciHub. So our official website is www.filscihub.com, and that's where we post all our webinars, tutorials, modules, virtual labs, and special features, and all of them are for free. And we're also present in several social media, like Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and TikTok. So if you haven't already, follow us on whichever social media you're most active on to keep updated on FilSciHub activities. Now, to officially start the webinar, I would like to turn the virtual floor over to our host this morning.
Ayan po, magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Sa mga kakasali lang po, welcome po sa Filipino Science Hub. At if you missed the house rules po, no, just to remind everyone to keep themselves muted and turn their video cameras off. We will give you an opportunity later on po to ask your questions live or type in your questions para lang po smooth yung ating session. So this morning we are so excited about this very first webinar on our teaching training program. It's a tripartite collaboration between FUSE, PNU, and FilSciHub. And we are so excited that everyone gets to join this morning. So ang title po ng ating webinar is Underpinnings of STEM Teaching by Dr. Brando Palomar of Philippine Normal University. So to give us a more background of this training series, I would like to have Dr. Jeff Bunking speak about this for the next few minutes. Dr. Jeff, please take over.
Yeah. All right. So thank you so much, Dr. Dindy. So okay, so magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Sa atin pong mga guro na nagpa-participate dito sa event na ito. So una po, before po tayo pumunta dun sa webinar proper, I would just like to talk about this very exciting tripartite project or training program that we have launched for our STEM teachers in the Philippines. So what happened po earlier this year was that the foundation for the upgrading of the standard of education, so it's the educational foundation under the Lushutan group of companies, we initiated this initiative po in collaboration with Philippine Normal University. And ang goal po ng program na ito is to elevate the quality of STEM teaching in the Philippines. So we believe, and we're actually quite proud to claim that I think this is actually a paradigm shift of of the first kind na i-introduce natin sa Philippines. So ito po yung ito pong training program na ito, it actually boasts of two very important components. So ang teacher training program po natin in collaboration with FUSE and PNU actually couples pedagogical training courses. So essentially yung pong mga natutunan ninyo sa kolehiyo and siguro updates when it comes to fundamentals of pedagogy ay i-deliver sa atin at binuo ng institutions who are actually leaders in education in the Philippines. So we have a FUSE, as I have mentioned earlier, and also the Philippine Normal University. So, and to balance it po, kasi sabi nga natin sa FilSciHub, we're trying to launch a culture. Kailangan balanse. Kung ano yung natututunan natin sa loob ng klase, kailangan meron rin kayong essentially guidance kung paano ba ma-apply yung mga natututunan ninyo. So dito na po papasok yung ating mga ang ating Filipino scientists from Filipino FilSciHub. So balanse po yung approach natin. Pedagogical training courses from our educational leaders from PNU and FUSE, and it's coupled with practical and innovative STEM teaching strategies delivered to you by Filipino scientists in FilSciHub. So ito po yung programa na ating inilunsad kamakailan lang, at ito po yung first installment of our pedagogical training courses. So as I have mentioned earlier, balanse yung approach. Meron tayong 4 na kurso when it comes to pedagogical strategies, and then 4 na kurso naman po for innovative STEM teaching strategies. So dito po nakapaloob sa unang category yung pong lahat ng courses that will be offered by Philippine Normal University. So for today po, our first offering is titled Underpinnings of STEM Teaching by Professor Brando Palomar. And then after that, end of the month po, August 30th, we will be joined by Professor Sheila Sia from PNU rin, and she will actually talk about strategies on how to create modules. After that, it will be followed by a webinar by Professor Chris John Mejia Pastor of PNU as well, and he will talk about strategies on how to deliver virtual lectures. Ito pong mga topics na ito ay sobrang napapanahon, lalong-lalo na sa pagtuturo sa panahon ng pandemya. And then we will tap the pedagogical training courses with a webinar by Professor Alphonse Jason Pelgone, and his talk will focus on STEM teaching assessment strategy. So paano ba yung assessment sa panahon ng pagtuturo during the pandemic? And then on the other side naman po, yun pong ating practical and innovative STEM teachers for the benefit of those who may have just learned about this training program. Sinimulan na po natin yung mga nauna nating webinars by our FilSciHub scientists. So on May 22 po, we actually delivered a webinar titled Importance of Effective STEM Teaching. So yung pong mga events dito na nakaraan na, you still have the opportunity to take them up because ito po mga ito ay recorded po sa ating YouTube channel. So those of you who would actually watch these recorded webinars would still be eligible to get certificates of participation kasi recorded naman po yan. And then, yung second session po natin na ginawa natin ng June 26. So this featured Professor Lindy Boyles, yung ating host for today. And she was joined by Professor Michelle Lansigan of American University. And together, they delivered a webinar titled Practical and Innovative STEM Teaching. So on the perspective of a professor in higher education and also someone who is practicing research or STEM such as Professor Dindy. Yung pangatlong installment naman po na nakaraan lang. So just a few weeks ago, so our third installment had focused on the design of lab experiments and virtual labs. So again, pwede niyo po itong panoorin. So this specifically was delivered by Professor Joan Aguila from University of the Philippines, Mr. Marty Mateo from the Institute of Plant Breeding in UP, and also by Dr. Chester Dabalos from the University of Hawaii. So, pwede niyo pa rin pong i-take yan kasi ang goal po natin is matapos ng ating mga guro ang 8 training courses na ito. And then we will be capping our innovative STEM teaching strategies by a crash course on the fundamentals of research teaching to be delivered by Mr. JP Onya from ABO Academy in Finland and by Dr. Annalette Carrasco, a scientist based in Houston, Texas. So, ang goal po natin ay lahat po kayo mga nagpa-participate sa program na ito na matake ninyo itong lahat ng mga virtual training courses na to on pedagogy and on innovative STEM teaching strategies. Kasi ang goal po talaga natin is to elevate. Paano ba natin mas mapapataas pa ang antas ng pagtuturo natin ng STEM sa bansa? And it actually doesn't end there. So ito pong program namin ito, ang plano din po namin is to provide some of you, hopefully later on, like all Filipino teachers with the opportunity to apply all of the things that you learn from all these training courses in such a way that you'll also receive coaching from us. You'll be provided with feedback, and in such a way that would also facilitate for you to apply everything that you've learned into constructing instructional material. So magagawa kayo ng modules, i-defend nyo sa harap ng panel ng scientists at ng educators from FUSE, from PNU and FilSciHub. And then later on, kapag na-defend niyo yan, gagraduate kayo dito sa Teaching Fellowship Program. So, yung details po nitong programa na ito, ng parang quote-unquote internship or internship para sa ating mga teachers, will provide you with details po kung paano ba kayo makakapag-participate dyan later on. But ito po yung kapupuntahan nito. Hindi lang po kami titigil sa pagbibigay sa inyo ng webinar, will also come up with opportunities para ma-apply ninyo, para ma-actualize ninyo lahat ng aming itinuturo dito. And you'll also be given the opportunity to share the instructional materials that you created on a national platform para kumbaga kung ano man yung ginawa ninyo for this out of this program, i-share natin sa buong bansa. So yun po naman po ang ating gusto po to actually come up with the network of support, with a network that can support and that can also help you get access to resources. Alright, so ultimately po, ito po yung buong proseso na gusto naming ma-achieve para dito sa ating program na ito. Makapag-take kayo ng pedagogical and practical and innovative STEM teaching courses, ma-apply ninyo ang inyong mga ginagawa, and then at the same time, for you to be recognized. So at the moment po, we're actually working on accrediting this training program para naman po itong free training course na makuha ninyo, since uukulan po ninyo ito ng panahon, ay makakuha din naman po kayo ng CPD units later on. So that's something that we're working towards po, and then if that actually ever happens, then we'll let you know para po kumbaga ma-incentivize din naman po ito sa inyo. And so there's a lot more details that we'll be announcing in the upcoming webinars po. We will also work on, we will also be having a ceremonial signing of the memorandum of agreement, among the 3 parties involved in this webinar series. So hopefully po, by then, makakapag-provide po kami ng more information. So kung ano po ba talaga yung mga detalye kung paano kayo makakapag-participate in all of the program steps. Okay, so Dr. Dindy, so let's introduce our speaker now.
Thank you, Dr. Jeff. So it's my honor to introduce our very first speaker for this training series, Professor Brando Palomar, who finished his Bachelor of Secondary Education majoring physics degree from the Philippine Normal University as a DOST SEI project 9001 scholar, and had his Master of Science teaching with specialization in physics at De La Salle University. He is currently an assistant professor at PNU, where he experienced teaching physics courses, integrated sciences, history, and philosophy of science, research, curriculum, and assessment courses in science education. He was a former science teacher of Parañaque National High School, Maine, for 8 years, where he supervised science club activities and handled science fair and research subjects. He has actively participated in numerous trainings and seminars and presented papers in local and international science conferences. In 2012 and 2013, he served as a trainer in NEPED's National Mass Training Program under the K-12 science curriculum for grades 7 and 8 teachers. He also took part in the Senior High School Teacher Training Project of the Commission of Higher Education, FUSE-PNU, in 2016. He finished his PhD at the Education University of Hong Kong with area of focus on science education and assessment under the CHED United Board Faculty Development Program. Currently, he is the officer in charge of the Faculty of Science, Technology, and Mathematics under the College of Teacher Development in PNU. So let us all give Dr. Palomar a warm welcome. And sir, we turn the virtual floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dindy and Sir Jeff, for inviting us and being part of this program. So let me share with you my screen. Okay, again, good morning to everyone. And this is really a wonderful opportunity for FilSciHub and the Foundation for the Upgrading the Standard of Education, or FUSE, and the Philippine Normal University will be tying up together in providing this online teacher training program. What I'll be sharing with everyone for this morning is somehow an overview of everything that we will be doing and items that we will be observing and incorporating, as my other colleagues such as Dr. Sheila Sia will be sharing about creating modules, Dr. CJ Pastor on providing or developing, generating your lecture videos, and Professor Alphonse Pelhone for giving us a background on assessment strategies, particularly during this kind of remote teaching. So yes, good afternoon, good morning, and good afternoon or good day to those who are with us in this platform. So again, for this morning, let me guide everybody on the principles of STEM teaching, an overview of everything that we will be doing for this fourfold training that PNU will be sharing with FUSE and FilSciHub. So likewise, may I also invite everybody to please go to our suggested link posted on our chat box for you to interact with me as we proceed to the details of our presentation for this morning. Okay. Since we wanted everybody to participate and others will be joining actively, so I would request you to go to Mentimeter, and as shown in our presentation, there are some items that we needed your response in order to make our presentation more interactive. So our session for this morning will focus on the following competencies or objectives. First, we will be recalling basic learning theories in the teaching of science and mathematics. Then it will be followed by giving us an understanding on the nature, components, and instructional models of inquiry-based teaching, which is highly observed in science and mathematics teaching. Then we will be describing the significance of context-based instruction and socio-scientific issues in science and mathematics teaching. Last will be the discussion on the relevance of doing formative assessment practices in developing effective learning. So before we proceed on the first section, may I ask everybody to, as I mentioned here, go to the link so that we can see how many individuals are already with me, so that your responses will be part of our discussion. So my first question will be this: what are the essential learning competencies or skills, okay, our students needed to learn from our science and mathematics courses. Okay, we have one. So these are the responses already by 2 of our participants. 4 participants already provided us their responses, and we are generating a word cloud that will give us an idea of what are those things that your responses will be representing the general idea of our participants. So as of the meantime, we have 47 or 48 and counting responses. And the word that is with the bigger font suggests greater frequency, and that is critical thinking, and followed by problem solving. Okay, then there are other words such as problem solving skills, which is related to problem solving. We have process skills. Okay. So as of this time, out of 95 or 100 to be exact, critical thinking is still the #1 response from our participants. So I guess we all do share the same understanding that the most essential competencies that our students will really need to learn from our science and mathematics teaching is for them to develop this critical thinking and problem solving skills. Okay, which both competencies are highlighted in the K-12 science and mathematics curricular programs. Okay. So I guess we can still wait for about 10 seconds before we proceed to the next section. And thank you very much for your active participation. That yes, I would agree. I definitely agree with you that critical thinking and problem solving skills and science process skills are the key or the essential learning competencies, part of the hidden curriculum of the K-12 science and mathematics programs. There's also a good answer here about creativity, innovation, or innovativeness. Okay, so as of this time, we have 169 participants who provided us their responses. Thank you. Now let's proceed now to the next section. So I'll be sharing with you the learning theories in science and mathematics education, but not all. Only those who have higher marks or level of success at the same time, which are still dominant in our science teaching and mathematics teaching practices. So historically, there are 3 major learning theories that provided us understanding how our students best learn and how do we describe learning. So on the context of behaviorism, we have the idea that learning is a process of acquiring factual knowledge, and we try to come up with an understanding of learning by associating it to stimulus and response, such as what Iva Pavlov mentioned in conditioning. Okay, and then it also focuses on observable behaviors of learning, on which behaviorism was not able to contextualize the idea of cognitive processes. Okay, but let me share with our dear teachers that even until the present time, we are still practicing some of the tenets or some of the principles of behaviorism in our classes. And there are literature that would suggest that it has a certain level of success when we are trying to promote learning to our students, more particularly with the context of Asian culture. Good example of this will be the introduction of classroom routines and communication of the learning objectives, the way we decompose complex tasks into a series of increasing challenging steps in order for our students to cope with. Even the context of providing repetitive techniques of learning and memorizing factual knowledge. Though they are attaining only the low order thinking skills, but still they have been successful in promoting learning to our students, as I mentioned earlier, more particularly among Asian culture, maybe because of that distinct acknowledgement and respect that we are conveying to our or expressing to our teachers, that somehow gives us certain influence of behaviorism in our classroom setting. Let me emphasize the first item on the implications of practice of behaviorism, such as the use of repetition techniques for learning skills and memorizing factual objectives.
Uy, Sir John.
Okay, let me continue with that. Okay, why do we have to do that? Why do we have still include it in our teaching of science and mathematics? If I'm not mistaken, Edward Reddish mentioned that in order to make our teaching more meaningful to our students, we have to provide them varied but repetitive learning experiences. The key concept there is variation and repetition. Okay, it goes with the law of practice. That's why in most science and math classes, particularly when we are sharing our students competencies that requires them to solve mathematical problems, we provide them drills, exercises, because with the idea that when students are familiarized with this set of exercises, then learning will take place. Okay, so the idea of providing them additional tasks from simple to complex that they are required to do it as a form of exercises or drills is part of the context of behaviorism. So hindi po kaila sa bawat isa na we really have to include this in our learning delivery, whether we are still on the remote teaching setup or settings where we are providing our students what we call this modules at the same time doing online and offline learning modalities. So I guess we have to still include this and impart it. So when we are developing our learning modules, there should be a set of tasks that would require them to practice or to exercise what they have learned from the previous part or context of our learning modules, that will allow them to come up with ways or means of verifying what they have learned previously. But again, things have to be demonstrated or presented to them in a scaffold manner, which will be emphasized by the next learning theory. Likewise, behaviorism also emphasizes on the use of prompt feedback, because feedback is necessary that will be providing us ways or determining the efficiency of our instruction. At the same time, it will promote students' engagement and student reflections eventually. That will be discussed later as we go on with our discussion. And likewise, behaviorism prompt us on individualized learning program that will enable our students to work on their own specific rates or phases. So these are the implications of behaviorism that are common and still being practiced into science teaching and mathematics teaching. The next item is more of cognitive science. Okay, this perspective was introduced, okay, when we are about to how do I call this? When we are trying to compare the human mind with how the computer is working. So in this case, learning is modeled as a form of information processing. So in this case, there are a series of actions that are actions of modules or incoming information. Okay, wait. Where we try to represent memory as a system composed of central executive, phonological loop, visuospatial sketchpad, and episodic buffer. So it gives us an understanding that the human brain is working of different tasks relative to the different parts of it that are very responsible on how we will be understanding and doing learning. Okay. Now, why cognitive science is still important in the present science teaching and mathematics teaching? Because we still observe some of its implications in our practical teaching. First, we have the idea of chunking, where we try to divide the content of a big science and math content into smaller units, because we have the idea that with this form of chunking, we are assisting our students to come up with retention of the things that they have learned from our class. That's why one good trait of an efficient science and math teacher is that if we have a better understanding of the curriculum itself, we were able to unpack the learning competencies into sub-learning objectives that will provide our students minimal and incremental understanding of the bigger learning standard or performance standards that we are requesting them to demonstrate eventually. So that's part of the cognitive science. And then we also have this perspective that if we will be providing our students both visual and verbal transmission of learning, it will provide our students more meaningful engagement in our class. That's why in education technology, we were given the idea of the Dale's cones of experience, because it gave us the perspective of using the different senses on how our students will be having retention of their learning. So as of this morning, I am trying to ask you to be engaged with me, because this kind of level of engagement will provide us greater retention of what we have been sharing with you, or what you are sharing with us, the same thing what we are learning from each other. So let me emphasize that when we are developing our lectures, video lectures, when we are developing our learning modules, at the same time when we are preparing our assessment tasks, I guess it is necessary that we also needed to consider both visual and verbal senses that our students will be maximizing in order to relate and to come up with better understanding of the things that they are learning from our modules, lectures, and the likes. Okay. Lastly it's the idea that in cognitive science, we wanted to support the ability of our students to regulate their own thinking, because we are having the perspective that in this manner, it's a way of processing all the information that they are acquiring from us, and they are experiencing either in remote setting of learning environment or during online and offline settings. So it's necessary that we have to understand that if we're going to think learning as an information processing action, therefore we have to design our modules and we have to design our lectures in such manner that it will help our students to regulate their own thinking. Eventually, it will yield to a higher level of knowledge, which we all wanted to acquire to our students, and that's the process of the practice for them. I mean to say that's in order for them to practice metacognition. Okay. Okay, let's proceed. And the last will be Constructivism, which have been dominant for a long time, that describes learning. And somehow most science and mathematics teaching, instructional models, and even pedagogies were anchored on the principles of constructivism, where we see learning as an active process, and we do acknowledge that our students have these pre-existing ideas or schema that they can really associate to what the things to the things, I mean to say, that are they are encountering or they are experiencing in nature. Eventually, these experiences that they have, these prior knowledge that they have, will be used as we can capitalize it as a springboard in order to cup or to to come up with a baseline of understanding of our students on a particular lesson that we are presenting to them. So we have to recognize that our students come to our class, that they have this existing ideas. There are different literatures that would suggest that and describe this perspective. Others use the term P-prims. Others use these terms as their schema, or and then eventually they come up with ways of categorizing this as either a form of misconception or a form of transitioning to a more acceptable scientific form of knowledge. Okay, so we have to recognize this kind of perspective, that our students is not really a sponge that will be entering to our students, that they will be absorbing everything, because they have a prior knowledge based on their experiences. Okay. In this context also, we have to recognize, in this learning theory, I mean to say, we have to recognize that the learner's knowledge is described as a conceptual structure. Therefore, the students have the ability to structure and to reshape their understanding and their learning. So in constructivism, let me emphasize that there are two main processes as described by Piaget. Apologies for the misspelling for that. Okay, it's more of the assimilation and accommodation. It's a form of trying to alter the prior knowledge based on the new knowledge that they are acquiring. That's accommodation. Assimilation is a process of trying to fit in their existing knowledge to what they have, or their experiences to what they are trying to experience right now. Therefore, in that sense, we tend to describe that learning is a process or a cycle of assimilation, cognitive disequilibrium, meaning to say the students experience some mental challenges on whether to accept or not the new learning that they are acquiring or experiencing. Then the process of accommodation, where we try to provide more evidences to our students that this is the more acceptable scientific and mathematical concepts. Then eventually they try to incorporate it to come up with a cognitive equilibrium. Then the next session will be a form of assimilation again. So that's how we try to present learning based on the context of constructivism. And eventually, because of constructivism, we were able to understand the significance of scaffolding. Okay, this is a manner on how we as science and mathematics teachers provide different learning tasks of different levels that will bridge the current status of the understanding of our students, whether it is a form of misconceptions or a transition to a more acceptable conception. We try to link it to what we desired for them to understand or to learn. So that scaffolding approach, which is highly emphasized in constructivism. So constructivism, as mentioned earlier, has been dominant in our understanding on how students really learn, particularly in science and math. Thus, we tend to come up with different practical implications that we still recognize and practice. Okay, first is the carefully guided discovery. When it was mentioned, when constructivism, I mean to say, was popularized, we were able to provide discovery approach to our students. But as time goes on and based on literature, we were able to come up with a good documentation that the best way to introduce discovery for our students is on the context of carefully guided discovery that would lead to a more effective learning in science and in mathematics, because we wanted our students to be actively engaged in the development of the idea out of tapping their curiosity and providing learning tasks that will enable them to discover and to relearn. Okay, the idea, what I mentioned, is to relearn, because we recognize that our students have this kind of prior knowledge. Okay, then we also recognize that based on constructivism, the role of teachers is more of the facilitation of learning that would provide students support on their personal activities, particularly in meaning making. Okay, so what we wanted is that we provide learning activities to our students that will make sense to them. But the question is, how those learning activities really make sense to them? Then we will discuss it later. Okay, and in this context, we wanted to emphasize that it is also necessary as science and mathematics teachers to assess these pre-existing ideas, or what we in other literature they suggest or they define it as alternative frameworks or alternative understandings of our students in order to maximize modification of their conceptual understanding. That's why in 1990s, the most recent trend in terms of science education and mathematics education research is more of how do students really experience conceptual understanding using different innovative instructions. And then we wanted to verify what are those pre-existing ideas of students eventually manage to come up with a more appropriate and relevant learning task in order to elevate this pre-existing knowledge into a higher or acceptable form of knowledge. Okay, and because of this, we were able to identify different misconceptions of students in science and mathematics, which we have to be more familiar, or we have to be familiarized with, because we wanted to, as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to capitalize on this schema of our students in order to come up with appropriate understanding at the same time of identifying what are the prerequisite competencies that we have to firm up to our students in order that when they are encountering this new topic, they were able to come up with a more acceptable understanding of the lesson. Okay, so in this case, we wanted to re-emphasize the significance of constructivism as a way of promoting conceptual understanding and for the students to come up with meaningful learning experiences. So why do I have to come up with this review or recall? Because we wanted to highlight those best instructional practices that you are already including in your science and mathematics teaching. They have already established certain level of success. But at the same time, it's also necessary that we have to reinvent and we have to understand that there are different perspectives on how we can see learning, because this form of orientation or understanding how our students learn, and I mean to say our orientation on learning and on teaching directly influences the knowledge of teacher in terms of how we will be appreciating the curriculum, how we will be understanding the way the students are learning, how we will be the knowledge of teachers when we are designing instructional strategies, learning materials, and the use of technology, and how that we will be assessing the learning of our students, which captured on the effective teaching model known as the PCK, or the pedagogical content knowledge. And then with the advent of technology, we have the TPCK, including the great role of technology. That's why we have now the technological pedagogical content knowledge. So these two, or the transition of PCK to PCK will and its tenets provided us a more understanding on how understanding and guidance on how we science and mathematics teachers or the STEM teachers will able to come up with better means and ways on how we will be improving and describing how effective our science and mathematics teaching. Okay. So let's proceed with this question. How do students learn best or most in science and mathematics? So let us hear your answers, dear teachers. Again, the question probes more of how do students really learn best or learn most in science and in mathematics classes? Okay, good. we see answers such as the context of contextualization, providing them hands-on activities, learning by doing, okay, providing application, repetition, applications of concepts. Okay, we have individuals who are answering on our Mentimeter, and we have also students who are participants, I mean to say, who are sharing their answers in our chat box. Thank you for your responses. Okay, so I do really agree with our responses that it's more of providing them learning experience where they will be using most of their senses. Okay, based on Dale's cones of experience, the more senses that we use, the more meaningful and the greater the percentage of the retention of what they have learned, what they are what they are learning from our class. So that's why it's one good challenge for us teachers when we are developing and creating our modules and observing our online classes, that we really have to maximize all the senses that our students, I mean to say, we really have to utilize the senses of our students in order to for them to appreciate, and then learning takes place in our science and mathematics classes. Okay, we have around 128 responses in Mentimeter, and we also have other responses on our chat box. Thank you very much. Let's proceed, dear teachers. So that is why we wanted to emphasize that we should have to come up with a structure or an instructional model on how we will be teaching our students. And this can be incorporated both in online and offline learning and teaching settings. Okay, so literature suggests about the level of success of inquiry-based instruction. Okay, so let me go first with this presentation of the development of inquiry-based instruction and how inquiry-based started at all. Okay, way back in 1910, okay, we have Armstrong, who introduced the idea of heuristic method, or the Armstrong method, where he wanted to emphasize that students students must have an attitude of being a discoverer. Okay, we wanted our students to experience finding out the things that they are learning instead of simply telling these items to them. Okay, for most of us who have been in the teaching profession for 20 or for 30 years or 2 or 3 decades, we were given the impression out of our previous learning experiences that our teachers are the sole source of information. And for most cases, we were given the idea that we have to learn, the best gauge of learning is on the factual knowledge that we are gaining. But the trends right now, and even how we define learning, likewise, the goals of the curriculum are already different from the time that we were students. Okay, that's why we have to recognize the idea that the manner that we are teaching is different from the time that our teachers are teaching us. So it's quite different. So we have to recognize this because eventually, upon recognizing this, we were able to come up with a paradigm shift on how we will be coming up and reinventing our science and mathematics teaching. So from this perspective, that Armstrong introduced that our students must have this kind of attitude being a discoverer. There were little improvement in science and mathematics teaching, and little evidences that inquiry-based was integrated in science and mathematics teaching. Okay, because of the strong hold and how teachers during that time embrace behaviorism. Okay, that teaching of science and mathematics should be like this, and students must learn the the facts, the basic information, and that's how we gauge learning during that time. Not until a great transition when Osabel introduced the context of meaningful learning experiences, where he described, together with his colleague, described learning as a product of active integrative interaction between new instructional materials and relevant ideas in the learner's existing structure of knowledge. So this is now the time when education sector try to recognize constructivism as an emerging theory of learning that somehow redirects and reshapes how we will be implementing teaching in our classroom. So when we say meaningful learning, it's more of acquisition of new meanings. And this process of providing new meaning to our student has two major parts, as I mentioned: assimilation and accommodation, where on this process of assimilation and accommodation, two things are we have to recognize: the prior knowledge of our students and the new knowledge our students will be learning. So the quest now for teachers is on how that we will be reconstructing this form of knowledge. So there should be a certain manner or process that we have to introduce in our classroom settings in order to capture and to actualize meaningful learning to our students. So eventually, when science education and mathematics educators come up with what we call scientific literacy, therefore, they come up with new ways and new goals or intentions of science. Okay, new intentions of science education. Therefore, in that time, we were able to come up with an understanding that we will come up with new ways or new lenses on how we will be translating these intentions of science and mathematics education into the classroom setting. So people were able, researchers and education advocates come up with the context of 21st century competencies or 21st century learning skills. Therefore, the modality of our instruction should be changed or should be altered. That's why, in order for our students to learn the concepts and processes of the different disciplines of science and even of math, it has to be presented and in an integrated manner. Okay, that's why in this context, we were able to come up with an understanding that we have to present an integrative, but at the same time, incremental progression of presenting the science concepts in different year levels, okay, which somehow backs up or or scaffold the main framework of the science and mathematics curriculum design, okay, especially in the Philippine setting. So because of these new advocacies, particularly on the context of scientific literacy and how we are envisioning our science and mathematics teaching, we were able to introduce this method of inquiry-based instruction as our, how do I best describe this? Okay, instructional model. I'll be using that as an instructional model in describing teaching and learning processes in science and mathematics classroom. Okay, but we have to understand first three distinct aspects of inquiry. Okay, where we wanted to have the understanding of science as inquiry, learning as inquiry, and teaching as inquiry. So when we say science as an inquiry, it refers to the diverse ways or methods scientists study the natural world. On the other hand, when we say learning as inquiry, it refers to the different activities our students are doing as they develop their own knowledge and understanding of the ideas that we are presenting to them. And at the same time, it's their way of understanding how science, or how scientists, I mean to say, study the natural world. Likewise, when we say teaching as inquiry, it's a way of providing authentic questions and experiences that will generate that are generated from students' experiences as our central strategy in teaching science. Okay, so in that context, we are given a sum up of understanding about inquiry as a multifaceted activity that involves observations, posing questions, uh, providing our students ways of examining different sources of information. They will be planning out investigation, reviewing what they have gathered, okay, from the experiment that we provided them, experiment activities that we provided them. We wanted them to analyze and interpret the data, proposing solutions or answers and explanations, and even communicating the results. So meaning to say, the items that I have been sharing with you are the key essentials that our students must experience in an inquiry-based instruction. From the time that we are posing questions, then the time that they are required to do observation, coming up with experiment activities, and then verifying it, determining whether which of the variables are the one directly influencing or identifying which are the independent and the dependent variables, and then coming up ways of presenting, analyzing, and interpreting the data, and providing solutions, okay, and sharing their results. So these are the sets of activities that our students needed to experience in order to capture what Ausibel's perspective of meaningful learning experiences. So in this context, later on, we will be giving you a certain form of instructional model under inquiry-based instruction that will capture these three distinct aspects of inquiry, of where our students will be experiencing the different ways the scientists are doing in their own experiments, as how teachers are providing, as how students are performing different learning activities that will help them to develop their understanding of the science and mathematics concepts. At the same time, of the triggers that the teachers are posing to our students in order to capture them into the learning process. So there are 5 distinct features of inquiry-based, okay, that we have to recognize, and there are 4 levels of inquiry-based instruction. So let's discuss first these 5 essential features, okay, of inquiry. First is that the learner should be engaged into scientific orientation questions. This is necessary. This is the prompt of everything. Okay. Then the second one is that we give priority to evidence in responding to the questions. That's why it is necessary that the students either to come up with a good argument, ways of reasoning, that when we say they have to argue, they have to reason out. So when they reason out, there should be evidence when they are explaining their thoughts or their processes, or we provide them learning activities that will give them or support their previous understanding or alter their previous understanding with certain as a form of evidence based on their learning sheets. Okay. The next essential feature of an inquiry base is that we have to provide ways for our students to formulate manners of explaining their evidence. That's why we also advocate the context of collaboration into our science and mathematics team. The main goal of collaborative learning is for them to perform the tasks okay, and to come up with resolutions. The term is resolution. So when we say resolution, it's a unanimous decision on how the group were able to attain the results. And in their resolutions, they come up with ways of revising and presenting their explanation with backup evidences. Okay, and then the next feature is that learner connects explanation to scientific knowledge. It's not merely providing them evidences from their learning activities, but we have also to probe what specific scientific knowledge back up their explanation. Okay, and last will be the learner should communicate and justifies their explanation. Okay, it is necessary that we have to provide a certain section of our learning discourse that students will be sharing their thoughts, sharing what they have, the results of their learning activities, in order for us to capture the level of their understanding, and also to identify whether there are some items that they needed to recalibrate on other end. Okay, let me share with you one good strategy. Okay, that for these four, for these 5 essential features of inquiry-based instruction be included in our instructional delivery, whether it is in the form of video, modules, or in the form of learning sheets, or even in our online synchronous sessions. Okay, a good example is the use of PEOE, where we ask our students to predict what will happen to a certain situation, and they have to explain why they have that kind of prediction. And then we give them manner to observe what will really happen and to explain what they have observed. Okay, if I'm not mistaken, a good colleague of mine, together with her advisee, come up with a study. You can check that. It's more of the PEOE of Bahar and Camacho, who have done that paper, probing the understanding of our students. Okay, at the same time coming up with gauging manners, or gauging our students on how they are connecting their observations with the scientific knowledge that they are learning on that kind of learning environment. So again, you can use PEOE in developing your instructional materials on that as we proceed with this kind of learning modality. Okay, now inquiry-based is based on our presentation, has 4 major levels: the confirmation theory, okay, the structured inquiry, the guided inquiry, and the open or true inquiry. It is defined in terms of their levels 1 to 4, where we see that the engagement of the teacher or the involvement of the teacher is very high for the first 2 levels and very low for the last 3 levels. Because as you can see in the open true inquiry, we just pose a problem and then the students will do everything. Okay, that is ideal to be given for students who have greater cognitive maturity. Therefore, for those students who are in the lower levels, grade levels, so we can come up with confirmation inquiry or structured inquiry form of instruction. And then maybe as they transition to grades 9 and 10 and even 11 and 12, guided inquiry can be presented, and even open through inquiry. So I guess we have also to consider the cognitive maturity of our students when we are introducing inquiry-based instruction in our classes. Okay, sorry for that. So as you can see here, in the first level, the confirmation theory, we are just reinforcing the prior knowledge of our students. We wanted to benchmark from what they have learned and coming up with different steps and guided questions that would allow our students to follow and translate that into their own learning. So the guidance of the teacher are highly evident into this level. Okay, and then in the structured inquiry, we tend to provide sets of processes that the students will follow, but there are some items or points where the students will realize, where students are asked to reflect, and the students are asked to define whether true or not the conditions. At the same time, the conditions of their learning, or if these are said to be aligned or to their previous understanding, or if their previous understanding already changed to a better or more acceptable scientific knowledge. Okay, which is also part of open guided inquiry. But more or less, we wanted we prompt research questions to our students, and then the students will come up with their own ways or mechanisms of doing the inquiry. And then on open and through inquiry, student does everything given a certain scenario. This is a more how do I describe this? This is a more helpful way for us to understand structured, guided, and open form of inquiry. Okay, where we wanted to present how these levels of inquiry are being presented into our classroom setting. As you can see, information provided by the teacher are presented into the higher rows. Okay, for structured inquiry, the question or issue to examine. Okay, these are the information given by the teacher. Okay, the resources needed by our students, and even the instruction that the students will follow in a step-by-step format. On the other hand, for guided, we have only presenting them the issue or the question and even the resources needed. But for open, okay, learner makes all the decision, what to investigate, how to conduct the investigation, and why do research this particular question are emphasized. So in more realistic manner, teachers who are handling scientific investigative subjects, more or less they are providing open or true inquiry level. Yeah, let me correct my statement. Let me rephrase my statement. Teachers who are handling investigative science courses more often practice open or true inquiry level. Okay. On the other hand, when we are providing our students problem-based learning experiences, we are giving them or providing them a guided inquiry level of instruction. But for most of our learning activities where our students have to follow series of step-by-step processes, what we are providing them is a structured inquiry level of instruction. Okay, so in that sense, as you can see, questions learners might ask themselves when they are engaged into this kind of learning activities are increasing when we are trying to provide them a structured level of inquiry going to an open or true inquiry level of instruction. Okay. So how do we really translate inquiry-based instruction in our teaching? Okay, there have been different ways of how inquiry-based instruction be presented or articulated into our classroom setting. Okay, we identify 4 of those instructional models. We start with the 3E, the exploration, invention, and the discovery, way back in 1962 by Atkin and Corplus. Eventually, we have the 5E of learning cycle, which has been prominent among science and mathematics teachers, where we provide different segments or phases of instruction such as engagement, exploration, explanation, elaboration, and evaluation. Then we also have the expansion of this, the 7E model, where we try to include elicitation and extension phase of instruction. Okay. In my paper, or I mean to say, in my thesis, I was able to capture that among my teacher demonstrators, these form of instructional phases are highly evident among secondary science teachers, that they really follow this model, as this model has been documented to provide high level of success in terms of appreciation of science learning, at the same time of incremental changes on students' understanding of scientific concepts. Okay, and then we also have the 6 stages of inquiry, the one that I've shown in my presentation. We have the inquisition, acquisition, supposition, implementation, summation, and exhibition. Okay, these words are just are highly related to the items presented in 5Es and in 7E model, at the same time with the 3E model. So they are all the same. It just so happened that some items are being more detailed, others are having some special features, but these 4 instructional models are highly inquiry-based in nature. And why do we have to use this, whether when we are developing our modules or when we are preparing our lectures, and even how we are designing our assessment strategies? Because in this manner, we were able to come up with means and ways on how we will be designing our learning. We will be designing the learning experiences for our students, the learning experiences of our students. Okay, now why? Why do we have to dwell with this? Because in this manner, we were able to, or in this instructional models, we were able to capture the 3 aspects of inquiry. Okay, when we provide activities that our students are asked to invent or to discover, therefore we were able to capture the science as an inquiry aspect of inquiry. Okay, then when we are asking our students to do the engagement, elaboration, or implementation, then we are fulfilling, or we are anchoring it on the perspective of learning as inquiry. Likewise, when we are providing elicitation, inquisition, supposition, exploration, and implementation perspective or phases of our instruction, then we are targeting the teaching as inquiry aspect. Okay, that's why I would really advocate our dear science and mathematics teachers to reshape our instruction following this form of instructional models. Whether you will be implementing 3Es, others we have their 4As, the 5Es, 7Es, or the 6 stages of inquiry cycle, then I guess this is more, let's test the waters, how the students will be responding on how we will be designing our online and offline learning activities, or our modules, and even our lecture videos. Okay. Now, so with that, as we transition, let me ask you these questions again. I have 2 questions, if I'm not mistaken, for this next slides. How do we make our science and mathematics teaching interesting? Okay. Again, for this question, the question is, for this segment, okay, how do we make our science and mathematics teaching interesting? Okay, through games, conducting experiments, okay, make it more relevant, interactive lessons, gamification. Yes, gamification is a very good tool. We have a lot of friends in the science education and mathematics education who are dealing with their who have their studies dealing with gamification, and there are certain level of success, okay, when they are introducing gamification. And gamification is one approach of what we call contextualization. Okay. Okay. Let me read some answers, also responses from our chat back. We use interactive lessons, incorporating games, providing experiments, role playing, okay, telling stories, gamification, okay. We have localizing topics, motivation, games and games applications. These are the responses in our Mentimeter. Okay, so I guess we're just waiting for your responses. This is good. I mean to say, this is provide real life applications and connections. Okay, that's why if you go back to the 5 E's or 7 E's, there's a certain segment that we are trying to elaborate and expand or extend the learning discussion by providing them scenarios in real life settings where students will be able to connect their new knowledge, their previous knowledge, new knowledge in a certain expansion or application of what they have learned. In that sense, we are providing meaning making to our students, making science and mathematics more relevant to their everyday living. Okay, thank you for this response. Okay, this is quite challenging. Interactive lessons, okay, and real world applications still connected. The context of interactive lessons, okay, so particularly on online setting, this is quite challenging because not all of our students have an equal leverage of access to connectivity and to technology. So I guess it's more on the innovativeness of our dear teachers, science and mathematics teachers, to make it more interactive. So there are different ways and means that we can capitalize the technology that are accessible to our students, okay, that will not require them greater bandwidth or financial affordances in order to support their learning. Okay, now I'd like also to emphasize simulation. Okay, simulation is a very good tool. Okay, maybe in one more topic with FUSE, FilSciHub, and PNU, we can discuss more of these items. So thank you for your responses. Now, with that, let me go to this question now. What do you think are the main goals of science and mathematics curricular programs? Because we recognize on the capacity of our dear teachers in providing meaningful learning experiences to them, but we also have to recognize that, are we really aiming the goals of science and mathematics? So okay, we have first answer is more of the nature of science, meaning to say understanding the purpose, at the same time the limitations of science. Okay, innovations and research. We have scientific literacy. Innovations, okay. So lifelong skills enhancement, as mentioned in our chat box, applications of their learning. Okay. So we have a lot of interesting answers of our respondents or our participants. Okay. So we have scientific literacy, innovations, and research are the still items with bigger font. So it suggests that most of our participants have this kind of understanding on the main goals of science and mathematics curricular programs. Okay. earlier I mentioned that the way, based on the framework of PCK, um, the part of its constructs, I mean to say, are two major dimensions of teacher knowledge. The orientation to teaching, which describes the different philosophy, which somehow describes the teaching philosophies and learning theories that teachers are capitalizing with, or they are holding through with their teaching, which influences their knowledge about the curriculum. Okay, why it is also necessary for us to understand the to have a good knowledge about the curriculum. It's because it will define us how we are going to translate the learning standards into day-to-day learning objectives. That's the main point of it. Teachers must have that kind of understanding for us to see how these learning competencies set by the government are being translated into the actual classroom settings. Unpacking those learning standards into detailed learning objectives requires certain skills from our teachers. Okay, and this is if teachers don't have the good grasp of the objectives of the curriculum, therefore maybe we are targeting different goals. Okay. In one occasion when I was still in DepEd, I wanted to share this perspective that there are items I really wanted my students to learn. Okay, but when I transferred to the university, I was able to understand that much that I wanted my students to learn most of the science or most of the math things that they have to learn, but there are certain competencies that they have to learn first prior from those things that I wanted them to learn and appreciate. Okay, so magkaiba po yung what I wanted to teach doon sa what my students needed to learn. Okay, so what my students needed to learn are best described on the curriculum, on the goals of our curriculum programs. Okay, so with that, okay, thank you for our 85 participants in the Mentimeter who provided us that the main goal, their responses capturing that the main goal or goals, I mean to say, of science and mathematics programs are innovation, scientific literacy, and there's research, global competitiveness, lifelong learning, and the likes. Okay, so and then on our chat box here, we have problem solving, critical thinking skills, scientific literacy. So with that, let me introduce first this item on how we will be creating it more meaningful and interesting. Is the use of context-based instruction and social scientific issues. Okay. Let me emphasize this, dear teachers, okay, that the goals of science and mathematics educations are two. First is for us to promote scientific and technological literacy among our learners. Okay, that's our major trust, that we provide them this set of competencies in order for them to be scientifically and technologically literate. Part of the scientific literacy is for our students to promote or to enhance their critical thinking and their problem-solving skills. That's our main objective. Therefore, in that context, we have to drive in that all of our learning activities that we will be providing to our students, all the learning experiences that they will be manifested or translated in our classroom settings, whether in online and offline mechanism, it should target scientific literacy to our students. That's the main goal of the science and mathematics education. Okay. The other goal is this. The teachings we are providing to our students is more of identifying also opportunities for our students who will be the next frontliners of science and mathematics. Particularly, we wanted also not only the great population to be scientifically literate, but we also providing opportunities for our students, we are opening opportunities, I mean to say, to our students who have the desire and interest to go into STEM specialization. And I guess that's one of the trust also of FilSciHub and of FUSE, okay, and even of PNU, that we are training future teachers in the context of PNU, but also providing them opportunities to go into the field of science and of pure science and mathematics. Okay, we are developing our students to be the next in line, okay, of practitioners, okay, of science and mathematics in the field. So we are happy to say that we have our own stories, okay, of our students who've been who choose to be in the field of science and in STEM in general. There are individuals who took engineering. We have former students who are now medical doctors. We have former students, I mean to say, who are now also in the academe, who are now also taking masters and PhDs in pure science and mathematics endeavors. And we are part of that that adventure. We are part of that story, okay? And I guess it's based on the kind of instructional deliveries that we provided to our students on the way that we engage them, okay? That somehow tap their interest into science and math. That's why I asked earlier, what are the goals, okay? The main goal is really to give meaning of science and math to our students, to make it more relevant, eventually targeting that they will be scientifically and technologically literate. And eventually, another goal of science and math is that we will be providing avenues and opportunities for them to see themselves as the next front lines of science and mathematics. Okay. Now, why we present this, aside from the idea that teachers must understand the goals of the curriculum, at the same time how the learning standards are being translated in learning competencies, is because there are items in the curriculum that may be very vague to us, but when we do understand them and have a good, I mean to say, when we have a good understanding of the curriculum, then it will able to give us appreciation on how we will be driving in our instructional deliveries, our learning materials, and even as our assessment practices. As you can see in these two frameworks of the K-12 science and mathematics curriculum, curricular programs in the Philippines, the main objective of science is for the students to have scientific, technological, and environmental literacy. On the other hand, for the mathematics, the core competencies are critical thinking and problem solving. These two frameworks are hand in hand together. At the same time, they are related to each other. Okay, so in that context, I see that the curriculum, okay, the theoretical frameworks of the science and mathematics frameworks are really targeting the main goals of science and mathematics education, to popularize science so that the community will be scientifically literate, and to hone future scientists and mathematicians in the field. Okay, but these new frameworks and these new goals of science and education, goals of science and mathematics education, I mean to say, provided us an avenue to redefine how we are going to present and going to reinvent our instructional delivery by introducing context-based instruction and the use of social scientific issues. So there are a lot of local studies on this matter. Okay, if I'm not mistaken, one of my master's students Mr. Castillo was able to come up with learning activities in context-based instruction in three forms: socioeconomic, socio-based, socio-cultural instruction, game-based instruction, and technological-based instruction under context-based instruction. And we were able to identify levels of success on student understanding, particularly senior high school students in learning physics, at the same time improving attitudes of students towards learning physics. Okay, but among these three forms of context-based instruction, the technological based context-based instruction has yielded greater and it is found out that based on their learning experiences that the nature of the students who are digitally native are more provided greater appreciation because of the access of technology and how technology is used or maximized in the classroom setting. On the other hand, there are also good local studies on social scientific issues in teaching chemistry. One of our former students who finished also his master's in De La Salle University come up with a good study and come up with documentation on how social scientific issues are used in teaching chemistry. Shout out to Mr. Bigkas. Okay. So in this case, we have context-based instructions as a way of utilizing real-world scenarios or context and relating it to the conceptual ideas of our students. Again, we capitalize on the pre-existing knowledge of our students. Okay, where the real context, okay, in context-based instructions are described in a form of products used in the society. Okay, situation being described or the events that occurred or has been occurring on the context of the learners. Okay, a good example will be more of when we were trying to develop the instructional materials on learning projectile. So we were able to identify one good practice of farmers when they are collecting frogs early morning. So we use that situation in order to present concepts of projectile motion at the same time using the experiences, the real life experiences of those students on a particular context. Okay, so this is a way of providing alternative means of teaching that are really far from the textbook-based teaching format, or even to the practice of teaching to the test. Okay, we all know that for some cases, for some episodes of our teaching, we have been guilty for this, that we are trying to teach our students of those items that will be reflected on the test. But we have to identify that there are hidden, that there are parts of the hidden curriculum that we have to also target to our students in order for them to come up with a more holistic and holistic learning, at the same time targeting the main goals of science and mathematics education. Okay, now why we have also to use social scientific issues, because they go hand in hand. Okay, when we say social scientific issues, it's more of a complex, open-ended, and usually controversial situations. Okay, but let me emphasize, there is no definite answers. Okay, because in this case, we wanted our students to promote their scientific reasoning. At the same time, the way that they will be arguing with you. There's a very good study on this, but she uses historical reconstructionist approach in teaching students, but also teaching students physics concepts, at the same time probing how students will be reasoning out. Okay, this is also another example of context-based instruction. Okay, in the study of Michelle Yakit from Makati, okay, she was able to identify different patterns students are reasoning based on the presentation of historical vignettes, okay, were in teaching electrodynamics, okay, particularly electromagnetic induction. Okay, so in a sense, you can see this is a side-by-side form of context-based instruction and social scientific issues, where in a sense, that kind of situation with such controversial issues presented together, where we're able to probe in how students explain their understanding and we were able to come up with patterns of it. So maybe it's a good way also that we have to explore this perspective or constructs of science learning among our students. But let me go back with the use of SSI, okay, where it presents valid yet opposing arguments. That's a more interesting idea, that we wanted our students to be more engaged at the same time that they will be providing us different ideas, opinions, okay, from different perspectives. And then we can see, we can identify already the prior ideas of our students. And eventually, as they go and exchange their ideas, we see how the students or these interactions of our students influencing the way they understand the new concepts. Okay. It's more of providing them avenue to brainstorm, to collaborate, and to come up with resolutions. Again, the term is resolution. Eventually, teachers will be facilitating and scaffolding in the elaboration phase, if you are using 5E's instructional model, as for them to capture a more acceptable scientific understanding. So in this case, the processes of informal reasoning will allow our students to address this SSI. So it's not really spoon feeding, but providing them a way to be engaged into the classroom setting. And in that sense, they will be formulating different positions. But again, as mentioned earlier, we wanted our students to find means and ways to back up or to support their claims. That's why evidence are really essential. Now, evidence-based instruction is another thing that we can also discuss in the future, but we wanted to encompass as much as possible, okay, with this kind of online discussion. Okay. Now, in context-based instruction, let me highlight these items. Why do we have to use context-based instruction? First, there are a lot of education issues that somehow CBI can be a good can be an answer on it. The overload of curriculum, the fragmented perspective of the content of our curriculum, where students are able to see one chunk to another chunk and there's no form of coherence of what we are teaching. Okay, student transfer of learning to new situations are really important. Okay, the application part of our lessons are necessary. Okay, the learning is not seen to be relevant to students' lives. Okay, and I for myself have been guilty for this. Okay, parang nung high school ako po, ang laging kong tanong sa teacher ko sa math ay para saan yung pinag-aaralan naming parang dy over dx. Okay, at naiintindihan ko, lagi niya sinasabi, for example, nung may mga lessons na kami ng mga integral part is that ang sabi ay pwede mo itong gamitin sa pag-determine ng number of canned goods na ilalagay mo sa isang box. Okay, parang sa akin, it's very abstract pa rin. Kaya minsan, pag umuwi mula sa school, papunta sa bahay, nagiging common joke namin magkaklase, yung pagbayad na meron kaming manong bayad po para po sa 2x squared plus 2x plus 3y, something like that. It may be a fun joke, but it gave me a good recollection nowadays that maybe I was not able to see the beauty of math when I was studying way back in high school, that it has that kind of real evidence, it can be, how do I describe that? It's more of the relevance in the real setting of mathematics. But eventually, nung medyo nagkaroon tayo ng magandang maturity sa understanding ng ating mga natututunan sa math, I was able to identify, for example, the significance of math when we are describing symmetry. That's one of the one of the lessons that I really appreciated when we are coming up with graphs. For example, when my fourth year teacher was able to provide us ways on relating, for example, the shift of a cosine graph to the left or to the right, meron na siyang binibigay na mga ways on why we have to understand that and relating it to the different relating it to our I mean to say relating it to the different subjects, like in physics and even in scientific investigation during high school. Shout out to Sir Arman. Okay. And confusion as to why learn through the subjects of science and math, because science and math are too really abstract. Let's face the fact that most of our students have difficulty in understanding science and math because of the abstract nature of the two subjects. Okay. Now, in that sense, that's why context-based instruction was introduced as a way of an alternative manner of teaching science and mathematics. Yes, po. Okay. Because in this sense, let me emphasize that according to Pilot and Gilbert and another colleague, when they presented the frames or perspective of context-based integrating CBI into the classroom setting, they identify 4 major perspectives that are essential when we are translating context-based instruction in our classroom settings. First is the inclusion of specific settings. Okay, so we have to identify the perspectives of our students, their background, their profile. Okay, at the same time, trying to relate it to the lessons that we are trying to provide meaning to their lives. Okay, then we also have to consider the behavioral environmental setting enabling actions, of which what are the processes that will be involved as we consider CBI in our classroom instruction. Okay, and we have also to identify the use of specific communication attributes, the language that the students are using. Okay, we have also to recognize this. I remember one advice with me by our former head in the department, Dr. Rebecca Nueva España, when she mentioned that you have to learn the language of your students in order for them to learn the language of our discipline. So immersing ourselves to the lives of our students, hindi naman totally pa-involved ka, but knowing their habits, their likes, their interests, somehow can be our best springboard in order to capitalize and to structure our instruction if we are implementing context-based instruction. Okay? Kasi yung everyday experiences nila, kung lahat ba sila naglalakad, pwede yun na magiging basehan natin. O lahat ba nagko-commute? Okay? Kasi pwede mong maging benchmark yun sa pag-introduce ng concept ng vectors, example. Or kung malalayo ba talaga sila o malalapit sila sa isa't isa. And then that's a way also of gauging that most of our students will have similar experiences. Okay. And also the idea of enabling linkage to prior and the new existing knowledge. So these are, again, this is anchoring from the perspective of constructivism. Okay. Now, there are 4 major phases, 4 major phases of context-based instruction. The first part is the initiation part, okay, or the initiation phase, where we try to identify the situation of which we are providing to our students. Then the discussion or the interaction will take place in the learning phase of the CBI. Okay, and last will be the third is the enhancement of the competence, okay, where the students will be able to apply what they have learned, okay, or they were able to alter their previous knowledge to a more well-established form of knowledge. And last will be the deepening, which focuses more of the appreciation on the relevance of their learning. Okay, now what I wanted to emphasize here is that these 4 phases are highly applicable and can be translated into inquiry-based instruction if, for example, we will be using either the 6 stages of inquiry cycle or the 5 or 7 E's. So these 4 are aligned to the different stages of the said instructional model. Okay. That's why in the previous study that I mentioned about the paper of Castillo, he was able to align these 4 phases of context-based instruction using the 5 E's learning of inquiry-based instruction. Okay. Now, let me emphasize also that the last phases, the last 2 phases are really important. All those 4 phases are really important in context-based instruction because, for example, the initiation phase provides the trigger and promotes interest and engagement of our students. The second phase promotes collaboration and discussion among our learners. And then the third and the last portion provides us an avenue for our students to weigh in, which is more appropriate, which is more relevant. At the same time, we are promoting self-regulation skills to our students and appreciation of what they have learned from our discussions. Okay, so that's why may I also interject that in this case, in the phase of deepening, it is also essential that we provide activities to our students that they will be reflecting on their learning. Okay, because again, learning nowadays cannot be assessed only by using paper pencil tests. There are other means or constructs that will define and presents evidence of our students' learning. Okay, and learning are actuated in different forms and in different levels. Okay, so in that sense, let me emphasize that inclusion of self-reflection to our learning activities, to our modules, to our reflection, to our videos are essential. Because in that sense, we are providing avenues for our students to weigh in and to look into what are the key points that they gathered, what are those items that seems to be very difficult to them, and why they have to learn it, and to what extent they may able to apply their learning. Okay. Okay, on the other hand, when we proceed to social scientific issues, let me emphasize that the main aim is to develop the aims of using SSI is encompassing. Let me emphasize on the second bullet, it's more of focus on empowering our students to handle issues, okay, that will that shapes the current world and will determine the future. Okay, in that sense, we are providing learning experiences to our students that what they are learning inside the class is highly related to their everyday learning. And we are also capitalizing the significance of science and mathematics, its role for the development of our society. This has been emphasized in science, technology, and society perspective, that the science provides us perspectives of or principles that describes the natural setting, which eventually drives or influences the technology that we are having right now, we are enjoying right now. But this technology influences the kind of society that we are involved with. And the interaction of society also iterative, because it also influences the development in technology. Eventually, this new technology requires new understanding. That's why there's a new form of new science. Okay, so we see here now that science, technology, and society are interplayed with one another, and we wanted that to be highly relevant to our students in order to make science and mathematics more meaningful to them. Okay, but as I mentioned, encompassing ang aim ng SSI, it's because part of it is we wanted our students to become responsible citizens. And part of it is for them to apply their knowledge and habits of mind in proper perspectives and how they will be capitalizing the manner that they are learning from our class, taking it out from the context of classroom setting into the real world setting. Okay. Now, I'm not very good into arguments. Okay. But when we are using SSIC, one form of thing that we have to bear in our minds is that we have to be more familiar when we are requesting our students to provide informal reasoning and to do a very good intellectual discourse and to come up with a more persuasive arguments. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 6 elements. Okay, the claim, which will be the statement, opening statement of our students. They have to provide us and persuade us using data and facts. So that's their grounds. And then eventually they try to link it and make it more legit. So that's what we call warrant. Okay. And then providing additional support, what we call backing, and then indicating the strength of their links, okay, which is our qualifier, and to come up with counter arguments called as rebuttal. Okay. Now, why do we have to do this, and what are the implications of SSIC in our teaching? It's more of stimulating the social and intellectual growth of our students. And lastly, providing avenues for our students to really enhance their metacognition, which is a higher form of knowledge, as we do understand in present psychology of learning. Okay, we have the factual knowledge, the procedural knowledge, and then the metacognitive. Okay, let me come up and ask another set of questions to our participants on how do we really assess our students' learning. Okay. Let's see, you may type in your responses on our chat box or even on our Mentimeter by, and let's gauge, okay, we come up with summative assessments, okay. Any more detailed or being more specific, okay, by referring to the learning objectives, using authentic assessment, performance-based assessment, yes, formative and summative assessment, creating assignments, okay. So we have here a lot, okay, and I'm happy to see your responses, particularly when you mention about authentic assessment, which is really, and for me, it's really essential for us to capture, okay, and performance tasks, okay, why we have to do these things, or why do we have also to employ diagnostic, formative, and summative assessment, okay, because it's part of the curriculum, okay. We have 62, 63 answers. Okay, thank you very much for your responses. Okay, let me, mukhang we're running out of time. Let me go on with this. Okay, first, my talk focuses on formative assessment. Okay, the last part of the underpinnings of STEM teaching. So I already presented theories, instructions, and then we proceed and cap our discussion with assessment, but focusing on formative assessment, which is also of equal importance with summative assessment. Okay, where I think my colleague, Professor Pelhoni, will be discussing more of this on his talk. Okay, let me share with you this statement of Black, who is well known in assessment, that an assessment activity can help learning if it provides information to be used as feedback by teachers and by their students in assessing themselves and each other to modify the teaching and learning activities in which they are engaged. Why I have to capitalize on formative assessment. In the statement of Black here, there are 3 major factors that we have to take in, which will be, I hope, part of your takeaways. First is the context of feedback. Feedback, as described here, is a way of interaction, okay, or manifestation of teacher and student interaction. Okay, without this, we cannot say that there is learning. Okay, Now, another key point here is that the inclusion of both teachers and students. We have to recognize that in doing formative assessment or assessment in general, okay, we are participants of the teaching and learning discourse have to realize that we are learning from each other. Okay, we are learning how the students are learning. Students are learning what they intended to learn. Okay, and the last part is on the context of modification. Okay, it's a way of giving us a clear translation of that feedback. If we were able to see what is the decision that we have to do, either to modify or to go on to the next process of our instruction. Okay, because formative assessment is our way to help our students, is our main way of gauging our students on how we are going to extend help in order for them to finish the race of learning. For example, in most cases, we employ formative assessment in our daily instruction. The daily quizzes are part of our formative assessment. The way we ask our students if they are learning or not, or if they are engaging to us, is a form of formative assessment and a direct way of getting feedback. And why it is essential? Because it's like a race. And in each race, there are certain segments. And at the end, which is our learning of the end terminal of our learning, okay, there are subsections that we try to unpack this learning standard into learning objectives. And if we have not come up with a proper decision based on the results of formative assessment or the feedback of our instruction, then how can we help our students to attain the different segments until such time that they will be attaining our terminal learning objective? That's why formative assessment is really important. Though it is not graded, but it is recorded, because these records will show us a way on how we will be modifying our instruction. A good example of this is the practice of Miss Ongkiko. Okay, when more or less they are trying to get the proficiency of the students' assessment results every day, because in that sense it will give her a good reflection on what are the items that students learned, what are the students have learned already, and what should I do for the next session. Okay, there are different ways on how to get an immediate feedback. Okay, and there are different assessment strategies that my colleagues will be discussing eventually. Now, another key concepts of doing formative assessment is the context of constructive alignment. Okay, that the learning outcomes should be related or aligned with the teaching and learning activities that we will be providing to our students, where these teaching learning activities should be aligned with our assessment. And the assessment, again, should be aligned to the learning outcomes. Bakit ko po ito gustong i-emphasize? Because it has been a common observation among with some of our colleagues. Lagi natin pong pinapacheck ito, ang ating lesson plan sa ating mga heads, sa ating mga department heads. But there are cases that it appears that our assessment is not really the assessment needed for that particular learning objectives. That's why one good construct of an effective science teacher is on the knowledge of the assessment. Okay? Under again ang PCK, meron tinatawag tayong teacher's knowledge on assessment, where it gave us a good reflection how teachers identify the essential needed to be assessed and what are the essential assessment tools aligned to the intended learning objectives that we set on our instruction. Then in that case, we see that there should be that kind of constructive alignment between these three key essentials among the 5 stages of the pedagogical model. Okay, so again, let me emphasize that these are important. Again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, these are, or you have already practicing this, but we wanted to emphasize because eventually this will also influence the way that we will develop, the way that you will be developing your lecture videos, the way that you will be developing your modules. Okay. Okay. Now, why formative assessment is important? Because there are different formative assessment strategies that we are employing or practicing in our classroom setting. For example, feedback in oral form, feedback in dialogue form, promoting confidence to our students. We also employ peer assessment. We also use effective group work where they have to provide learning. We provided them learning sheets. And then we come up with formative use of summative assessment. And these are the implications of these formative assessment practices to our students. Because formative assessment, as presented by Black, are essential so that it will help our students to be effective learners. Okay, let me emphasize, for example, the three of these assessment practices. Why do we have to request our students to respond orally? Okay? Because it will help us, our students, to be engaged in the discussion. Kailangan pa-involve sila sa classroom natin. Kailangan marinig natin kung paano sila nagre-reason out. Why we needed to give also importance to them. Kailangan natin ma-embrace sa kanila that we do care to their learning. And one way of showing it is by requesting them to answer, to respond. Kaya kahit nasa online setting na hindi masyado sila nagpa-participate, alam natin yan, there are studies proving that we have to employ that kind of assessment practice. Okay? Kasi baka ang inaantay lang din nila ay tawagin sila. At ang kinakailangan lang din ay mabigyan sila ng opportunity. Diba? It's their time to shine. Ika nga natin. Okay? Now, why do we have to provide group works? Okay? Because this first it enhances peer assessment. Yun yung nagiging scaffold ni peer assessment activities natin. But it also promotes self-regulation. Okay? Remember when remember the term I used earlier when we are requesting our students to collaborate. It's always resolution. And coming up with resolution is a way of promoting self-regulation to our students because they are trying to get engaged with one another, coming up with a common, an agreeable statement that these items are the things that we will be presenting and explaining. So in that sense, we are contributing to the learning and not learning of themselves, but of the group itself. Okay. And last is on the formative use of summative assessment because it's a good way for our students to help them appreciate the value of their overall review of their work. Okay. Bakit kailangan natin itong malaman yung proficiency nila, ilan yung tumama sa ganito, at bakit sa tingin nila sila nagkamali sa mga items na to? Because in that sense, we are providing them avenue to learn why they made a mistake and why they have to correct their understanding about this matter. Siguro ito yung iba sa mga assessment practices na ginagawa na natin, but we have to reinforce more because it also gives a good psychological feedback on our students' learning. Okay, so with that, let me end my statement, my discussion with this. What features of your science and mathematics teaching you will reinvent in order to enhance the learning of our students? Okay. Muli, I am engaging our participants to provide us your feedback. Okay. Importante yan. Ano ba sa tingin natin sa mga na-discuss natin? Ano yung posible nating ma-reinvent? Okay. Para sa tingin natin, ito'y makakatulong para sa mga estudyante natin matuto mismo or ma-appreciate din, I would suggest, yung science and mathematics. Okay. And I guess my other colleagues will provide us deeper discussion, particularly in creating our modules, developing our instructional videos, and providing assessment strategies in the coming webinars with FilSciHub, FUSE, and PNU. Okay. Your responses gave me a good reflection now. Parang ang bilis, no? Kinakailangan mag-reflect ka agad. That every one of us, dear science and mathematics teachers, really have that great desire to provide quality and meaningful learning experiences to our students. That's why I always capitalize in most of my trainings. I give a good remarks and I give good regards to our dear science and mathematics teachers. For what good reason? Sabi ko nga po during my proposal defense, I believe on the teaching competencies of Filipino science, mathematics, and particularly in my case, in the field of science teachers. It's not really on the incompetence of the teachers that drives or hinders them to provide meaningful learning experiences to their students, but it's more on the provision of learning opportunities. And I guess FilSciHub, FUSE, and PNU shared a little percentage of this learning engagement to our teachers to really equip ourselves to become effective and more of a quality teacher. And sabi nga natin, if you are a good teacher, you wanted others to be good also. And if you are also an effective teacher, you wanted your students to be good in your subject matter. So with that, thank you for your responses. Thank you for the interaction. And I hope that with this little sharing, we were able to refuel our desire to really be competent and quality teachers. Padayon tayo sa ating pagtuturo at patuloy nating linangin ang ating mga mag-aaral. Maraming salamat po.
Ayun, maraming salamat po Sir ER for the very extensive, sabi nga nila, comprehensive discussion. So, actually sir, we've been monitoring all of our all yung activities online, no? Specifically, we were trying to fish out questions, but then kitang-kita po na yung mga teachers natin talagang tumutok and para ma-absorb yung mga information na inyong shinare sa kanila. And so siguro po before tayo move sa Q&A, I'll just go over a couple of announcements para makainom naman ng tubig si Sir ER. Kasi that was like two solid hours of lecture. And also, by the way, sir, congratulations. We had a total of more than 500 live participants for today. So, combining all of our participants on Zoom and YouTube. So, sabi ko nga sa inyo, sir, para na kayo nag-concert sa Music Museum. So, okay. So, let me share my screen first. And Sir ER, if you would like to just you take a sip of water, no? Before we entertain questions, feel free to do that. So, para po sa ating mga guro na nagpa-participate po sa araw na ito, sa ating session, recap lang po. So, like as we said earlier, this program, which is being brought to you by 3 institutions promoting STEM education in the Philippines. So, specifically FUSE, PNU, and FilSciHub. So this program is comprised of 2 sets of training courses. So 4 po na pedagogical training courses, and then 4 na innovative STEM teaching strategies courses. So, dito po sa ating pedagogical courses, ang unang installment po natin ay ito nga pong training course ni Dr. Brando Palomar, si Sir ER of PNU. And then Monday next week po, don't forget to register to this event. So, Professor Sheila Sia from PNU will also deliver a webinar, but for this one, she will focus on strategies on how to create modules. So, talagang napapanahon po itong webinar na ito. Yung 3rd installment po natin sa ating pedagogical training courses will focus on how to deliver virtual lectures to be delivered by Professor Chris John Mejia Pastor. And then yung 4th and final pedagogical training course po natin is about assessment strategies. And this will be brought to you by Professor Alphonse Jason Pelgone. Ayun po. And then doon naman po sa ating
padakol pa siyang magayunon pala niyo.
Okay.
August 24 igwa, August 30 igwa, September 24 igwa, September 30 igwa,
meron po yan.
May 22 tapos na. June 26 igupos na.
Ken, could you
July 3rd
look into the list for listen? Yeah. Okay, so mabalik po tayo. So yung pong practical and innovative STEM teaching training courses po natin, doon na-deliver na natin siya live before since May up until July, yung pong ating first 3 installments. Importance of STEM, effective STEM teaching delivered to you by Filipino scientists from FilSciHub. Practical and innovative STEM teaching delivered by Professor Dindiyu and Professor Michelle Lansigan. And then number 3 po, design of laboratory experiments and virtual labs. Co-delivered by Professor May Joan Aguila of University of the Philippines, Marty Mateo from UPLB as well, and then Dr. Chester Davalos from the University of Hawaii. Lahat po yung first 3 na yan ay recorded. Pwede niyo po yung panoorin sa ating sa FilSciHub YouTube channel, and then yun pong link para po makakuha kayo ng certificate of participation is nandun po sa description box nung kada recorded video. And we'll do the same thing for this one. Towards the end of this session po, we will be providing you with a link para po sa ating Google form para po makakuha kayo ng certificate of participation for this webinar. And then lastly po, sometime in October, we will give you a crash course on how to teach fundamentals of research at the high school and elementary level. So that's to be delivered by Mr. JP Onya from Finland and Dr. Annalette Carrasco from Houston. Okay, Sir ER, handa na po ba kayo para sa ating Q&A? So what we did was, over the course of Sir ER's talk, we actually went over the Zoom and YouTube chat boxes, and we compiled some of the questions that which were actually essentially sent to us by our live participants. So, siguro po, Sir ER, we can start with a couple of these questions that I have posted on the screen. But then, for our live participants po on Zoom, if you would like to ask questions live, so please raise your hand, and then we'll acknowledge you, and then we'll allow for you to unmute yourself and then ask your question live. So yun po. Okay, so Sir ER, yung first question po natin, I believe this actually came from Zoom. So it's from Sir John Benedict Sai. What he asked was, should we slowly move away from behaviorism as a learning theory? If yes, what are your recommendations to replace or remove behaviorism as a used learning theory?
Okay, thank you for that question, Sir Benedict Sai. Okay, it's not really shifting from behaviorism maybe to constructivism. As I mentioned earlier, each learning theory have their level of success and practical implications to our teaching. Maybe it's a matter of combining which of these features of each learning theory are more acceptable and acceptable or appropriate to our learning setup, because each of these have their own issues, and they have been criticized by their contemporaries and even of modern learning theorists. But it's more of which finds a certain level of success in our setting. A good example, as I mentioned, is that one factor will be culture that we have to consider, because in the context of Asian learners, some of the tenets of behaviorisms are quite successful and provide assistance on students' learning. Unlike, though we wanted our classroom to be more student-centered, but still there are fragments or components of behaviorism and even of cognitive sciences that are translated into our actual classroom setting. So sa tingin ko, it's a mixture of those components ng bawat theory that will give us a more way of designing our instruction.
Okay, thank you, sir, for answering that question. So yung second question po natin, it's from Jeffrey Songkayawon. So he asked, so they say that constructivism promotes group thinking and ignores individuality of learners, to which could consequently result to some students that are left behind. Is it true? Totoo po ba, sir?
I would say yes, but at certain extent. Okay. Tulad na nabanggit ko kanina, learning can be measured into different forms. Siguro doon sa learning, sa manner na pag-assess natin kanina or yung naging practice natin, nakikita natin na yung mga students natin who are cognitively struggling ay nale-left behind talaga. Pero baka may ibang pamamaraan kung saan pwede natin ma-capture yung kanilang pagkatuto. That's one aspect that we have to consider. Another thing is that maybe the manner that we were able to group them has to be considered also. There are also studies that showing that the way that we group our students also influences their engagement. And if students are directly engaged and they were able to have a good discussion with one another, it's a matter of providing them opportunities to learn also from each other, because another good thing that we have to understand is that they have their own language, that maybe the manner that we are discussing may be too technical, but the way they are interacting, they are conveying their understanding on the level of using the language of using the same language and using the same language and same level of maturity. Okay. So sa tingin ko, pwede natin explore pa yon para makita natin how the students will be reacting, and maybe that's a good way to also to document the discussion and the way classroom are being held. Yun po.
All right, sir. Okay. On to our next set of questions. Pero before we proceed po, siguro meron po ba tayong live participants who would actually like to ask their questions live? Taas lang po kayo ng kamay, and then we'll give you the opportunity to ask your questions. Wala. Okay, nahihiya pa po sila. Okay, so another question from Sir Kent Joseph Ortula. So I think this is more of a comment po siguro. So we can make our sessions interesting when we do activities which are interactive and up to date or goes with the trend in the current time. So siguro po, sir, perhaps
Feedback na lang po.
Sir. Sige, sir.
It's a matter of, it gave us an impression about contextualization, okay, and even the use of SSI in promoting classroom engagement. Siguro po, there will be lectures of my colleagues that they will be presenting ways of coming up with interactive instructions and assessment, and that will be also a good thing that we will be following and we will be joining in.
Okay, thank you, sir. So I think we have a couple of questions from Ma'am Manolita White. So for yung first question po niya, right? What are the common challenges in STEM teaching that you encountered, and how did you address them?
When I was still part of DepEd, the most challenging part would be how to engage our students into learning. Okay, kaya siguro the good way is to reinvent your teaching. That's a good way, na hindi siya highly determined ng bata kung ano yung mangyayari. Okay, that's one thing. Na parang every day will be a new learning day for them. May level of excitement, baka sila papasok. Yun din yung magiging sagot sa tanong na para saan sila bumabangon. So hindi lang para sa kape or para sa baon, para matuto sila. Yung the way you will be presenting your class to them more interesting, it's one good thing that you have to do. Okay, pangalawa, I deviate from the structure of the curriculum when it comes to presenting the lessons. Kasi may mga lessons na pwedeng pagsamasamahin, may mga lessons na dapat manghimay-himayin. So ang ginagawa, for example, nung nagtuturo pa po ako ng physics, okay, yung Newton's laws of motion, dahil nagigauge ko po at na profile ko ang aking mga estudyante na most of them will be taking engineering courses. That's why yung context po ng Newton's laws of motion, instead of providing them only 4 or 5 days of learning experiences, I segment them into 8 sessions. At yung bawat sessions na yon ay merong specific na para lang kay first law, para lang kay second law, para lang kay third law, tapos application, may experiments, merong firm up, tapos merong bago mag-test. Okay? So it's a matter of alam natin kasi mahihirapan ng bata na intindihin lahat ito at merong mga required competencies na pwede nila magamit eventually when they go on into the next level of their learning. So para may ganung mga level of consideration. At siguro another item yung participation. Ito po hindi ko po na-emphasize sa akin lecture, but there are a lot of studies on the use of gamification, whether traditional form of games na may context of competition, okay, para lang maintindihan ng bata yung learning. Siguro kasama yon sa mga ways na pag-reinvent ko po ng aking pagtuturo ng physics. Making more things livelier, but it's not more of a circus thing, but still there's a form of structure. Yun yung iniisip ko natin, that the students will be engaged. Kasi ang philosophy ko pa sa pagtuturo, kapag na-engage mo ang bata, then pwede mo na ma-trigger or ma-push ang internal motivation in order for them to provide more, parang they will be more hungry enough of learning. Okay. Another item that I have to promote is that during that time hindi pa uso masyado ang YouTube. Okay? Parang long time na yun, no? But if I'm not mistaken, our school were part or recipient of the video lessons na dinevelop ng FUSE. Okay. At in that sense, I extend my gratitude to FUSE for providing us the training, at the same time for doing those things, producing those videos, because mahirap ituro ang mga abstract concepts ng physics. For example, yung context of electromagnetic induction. Okay. Siyempre, neophyte ka pa, nangangapa ka pa ng mga pamamaraan, but the training and the materials are very helpful kasi yung mga abstract na concept, you can present them using videos, but you have to use the terms splicing. Sinasegment lang natin. Tapos may mga follow-up tayo ng mga guided questions to firm up yung pagkaintindi ng bata mula sa video, tapos nire-reinforce mo. And I guess these are the interventions that I personally used when in teaching science and in science investigative subjects when I was part of the public system. And even now that still teaching in the academy, still those things are very useful, and they have showing a certain level of success in teaching and addressing particularly students' engagement.
All right. So actually, sir, I gusto ko yung thanks for a very generous answer, no, sir. Pero siguro sir, before ako, wala pa kasi nagre-raise ng hand to ask a question live. Pero siguro ako na lang yung gagawa nun. Kasi siguro sir, on the context, no, of kung ano ba talaga yung ultimate goal natin, no, for teaching STEM, no. Kasi I think you alluded to it quite comprehensively earlier, na parang what we would like is yung pag-teach ng science competencies, but then again, at the same time, gusto natin na siguro yung best case scenario ay makita ng mga estudyante na okay, maganda na mag-pursue sila ng science. So hopefully through yung teaching ng ating mga guro po sa loob ng paaralan ay makita ng mga estudyante nila kung bakit ay maganda yung may future pala sila sa engineering. They could become medical practitioners in the future. Siguro sir, meron po, baka pwede po ba namin kayong mahinga ng message of encouragement sa ating mga guro to also, keep, like those guiding principles in mind. Kasi po sir, di ba, ngayon po, lalo higit kailanman, mas kailangan talaga natin na, kumbaga ang ating mga guro, magawa parang #influencers, so siguro sir, sa konteksto po ng inyong mga natutunan at sa inyong experience, no, having taught at the high school level and ngayon po nasa higher education na po kayo, gaano po ba talaga ito sir ka-importante?
Sir Jeff, bigla po ako naghanap ng literature for that matter.
Binigla po ba kayo, sir?
Okay. In one commissioned research by the university led by Dr. Nevera on the STEM pipeline in the Philippines, there's a certain section that highlights we wanted to highlight is that teachers directly influence, that teachers and the teaching activities that the students are experiencing inside the class influences the career pathways of our students. So I guess that would be a very good challenge to our science and mathematics teachers to really provide meaningful learning experiences. Balikan ko po yung sinabi ko kanina, magaling tayo. magaling tayong mga science and math teachers, particularly Filipino math, science and learning, Filipino science and mathematics teachers. We are very good. The form of resiliency do not, I do not want to romanticize it, but there are evidences that would show how we were able to cope with and we were able to provide meaningful experiences to our students despite of the adversities that we are confronted with. So patuloy tayo mag-reinvent. That's a good challenge kung paano mas magiging quality teachers tayo. At patuloy tayo aside from reinventing, but we have also to capitalize yung knowledge na kailangan natin matutunan by either taking further degree courses or attending into this kind of programs that would really shape us, our thinking and our practice. Okay. Now, eventually, this will be translated on students' understanding in our classroom. At the same time, influences them to be into the STEM courses po. Challenge lang natin na paano ba? Siguro balik tayo sa baseline, sa drawing board na ano bang status ko ngayon at anong gusto kong mangyari sa sarili ko at sa aking mga estudyante. So with that, I guess, with that kind of reflection, we will be able to redesign and reinvent and redefine our teaching, redefine our teaching and redirect our teaching and reshape how our students will be learning.
So, maraming salamat po, sir. And siguro po, sir, ito isa segue ko na. Ito po talaga yung rason kung bakit po namin to ginagawa ng magkakasama ng Foundation for the Upgrading of the Standard of Education, ng Philippine Normal University at ng Filipino Science Hub. So it's not only para po i-refresh kayo sa mga bagay na tinuro na po sa inyo ng kolehiyo o ng inyong masters, but then again at the same time to essentially put all of these very important aspects of STEM teaching po para po kumbaga ma-remind at ma-re-inspire po or ma-reignite ang inyong passion sa pag-impluwensya po ng mga estudyante. Kasi ang teaching po, I would still believe is the noblest profession. Kasi kayo po talaga ang nagdidikta kung ano po yung quality ng ating mga future workforce sa Pilipinas. Kung kayo po ay natutuwa dun sa mga tao who actually succeed a lot, there's a lot more that you guys are actually producing po. And ang impact niyo po sa ating society ay endless. So hopefully po through these gestures na through these events na re-remind po namin kayo of those things. Siguro Sir ER, yung nabanggit mo mga studies na sir, yung parang yung pipeline ng STEM sa Philippines. Baka po at one point pwede nating i-share kung ano ba yung mga key takeaways from those studies para ma-remind ng ating mga teachers na ito yung mga competencies na kailangan in the near future para i-prepare ang ating workforce. Ano ba yung role ng STEM teaching? So baka po pwede namin yung i-deliver din sa inyo on a separate webinar. So yun po. Mukhang mahihain po talaga ang ating mga teachers, sir. Pero it's very obvious po na yung engagement talaga na ang dami pong nag-participate, sir, dun sa inyong online polls. Ang dami pong mga messages of appreciation sa YouTube and also sa Zoom. Siguro po, sir, entertain pa tayo ng a couple of questions. So one question also came from Ma'am Manolita White. So yung question niya po is, what common mistakes that teachers do in their classroom that contribute to students' standard learning experience, and how can those be corrected? Siguro sir, a couple of examples po kasi medyo broad yung question po.
Siguro yung idea na we do first is that we believe that students have their own prior knowledge when they enter to our class. And aside from that, they also have different forms of belief systems on our science and math classes. Okay, without recognizing these items, maybe we just traverse our teaching as how it is being planned. But identifying the misconceptions of our students, identifying their previous knowledge, and at the same time, looking into how do I call this? looking into the beliefs of our students on how they see our subject matters are really crucial and really important. Then in that sense, we will be able to provide them a way of redesigning our lessons, okay, and our learning materials. Siguro ito po yung hindi naman mistake, siguro dahil sa overwhelming na po yung ginagawa natin ay hindi natin po na-emphasize ang mga bagay na ito. Ulitin ko po, ang mga bata po natin, when they go into our class, whether face-to-face or online and even in modules, they have this set of prior knowledge, and this prior knowledge may be a little level of acceptance of scientific knowledge or misconceptions, pwede rin, alternative frameworks, and they also have certain beliefs on how they learn into our subject matter. Okay? Pero kapag ito pong dalawa na to ay na-alter natin o na-address natin, okay? Sa tingin ko po, it will help us to for them to see the relevance of science teaching. How it is corrected, first we have to identify them. Or first we have to be familiar or to be aware of these things. Okay, one good example of this is on the abstract nature of science and math and the presentation of mathematical equations to our students somehow inhibits them to participate into our classroom. Kaya siguro, good way of that is making good sense of social context of our students, making use of making use of the social issues that they are confronted with before introducing the equations itself. Okay, in that sense, baka doon sila mas feel nila na relate sila, feel nila that they are aside sa nakaka-relate sila, after that they were able to legitimize that they already come up with a good learning. Aside from alam natin na mahirap na yung math part talaga the higher form of math na pinipresent natin sa science and math classes natin po. So that's how I see it po.
Okay. So, siguro sir, actually nahiya pa rin nahiya pa rin po ang ating mga teachers. So siguro sir, instead of a question, no, siguro po pwede po ba namin kayo sir hingan ng siguro not parting words pero message of inspiration, and siguro sir again, why it is very important, why it is very important to always keep in mind, to keep these underpinnings of STEM teaching in mind whenever they are instructing their students.
Okay, Sir Jeff, siguro ganito na lang po. I wanted to be good because I wanted my students to be good. So in that statement, our quest to become quality teachers never ends, even we reach certain levels of our academic accolades. Okay, but it's more of the mission that we are being truthful with, the mission to impart this scientific and mathematical knowledge to our students, and the way that we will be reshaping, reinventing ourselves to become better teachers. Eventually, this will help our students to become better students because kung nakikita naman ng mga estudyante na A for effort ang ginagawa mo, sa tingin ko naman din students will be, especially Filipino learners, are really appreciative on how the teachers are responding and providing them varied, again, but repetitive learning experiences po.
Ayun, nako. Sir, maraming salamat po for the very inspirational message sa ating mga guro, and for generously sharing your knowledge and your time like for para po dito sa ating web event ngayon. And kami po actually sobrang napansin po namin ni Dindy. By the way po, si Dindy kasi it's already past 12 dun sa kanila sa Kentucky, so she actually had to sleep kasi may work pa siya bukas. But then we're actually kasi ngayon po talaga namin kitang bumuhos uli yung attendance ng ating mga teachers dito sa ating mga web events, kasi for the longest time they've been waiting for contents like this po na more focused talaga sa tools and knowledge na magagamit po talaga ng ating mga guro sa kanilang pang-araw-araw na pagtuturo. And I think more importantly during these times na napakahirap po. Talagang wala sila sa loob ng klase. So siguro po ang dami po talaga nilang mababaon out of this. So para po sa ating mga participants, I would actually I will be providing you with the link to the
Ayun yan, parang sa labas
certificate.
pag-araw.
Ay, para po sa if you just give me
Parang nagbago yung tiyan ko. Mula nung minum akong vitamins. Ano nangyari?
Ayun po. So, sisend po namin sa inyo yung link para po sa Google form. So, we will also be sending typing that dun po sa Google sa YouTube chat box. So, but then again, Sir ER, maraming salamat po. I'm hoping that like this is also a fun and fulfilling experience for you. Alam po namin and hindi naman po ito ang huli. Hopefully po makasama pa rin po natin kayo sa journey natin sa pag-i-impart ng knowledge sa ating mga guro. Kasi ito po kasing concept na diniscuss ninyo, it's timeless, di ba sir? Hindi naman nag-expire itong mga concepts na ito. Siguro na-improve, pero ito pa rin naman po kasi ang mga ginagamit natin sa pagtuturo. So again, sir, maraming salamat po. Baka po pwede... Yes, sir?
Thank you, sir.
Ayun. So, baka po pwede kami mag-request dun po sa mga willing lang na magbukas po ng inyong camera. Po tayo group photo po para mayroon naman din pong kumbaga remembrance kay Sir ER. So, ayun po. So, meron po tayo. Sir, ang dami pong umattend. So, as I said po, 500 plus po all in all. So, sa atin pong Zoom session pa lang, 15 po ang ating frames kasi ang dami po talaga nag-participate. So, please bear with us po, no? So, papasadahan ko po lahat para po lahat po kayo makasali. Anyway, so, ayun po. On the count of 3 po. 1, 2, 3. Yun po yung page 1. Page 1 of 15. Okay, second po. 1, 2, 3. Alright. Page 3. Naku, ang dami po. Sir ER, para ka ng artista niyan. Influencer talaga. Ang dami po talaga nag-participate. And, gaya po na sinabi namin, please join our session po sa August 30th. That's with Ma'am Sheila Sia po. It's a webinar about how to deliver or how to create STEM modules po. So, Ma'am Sheila is also a professor at the Philippine Normal University. So, isa po siya sa ating mga kasama dito sa atin sa ating FUSE-PNU and FilSciHub STEM Teaching Webinar Series. So, nakuha ko na po ng picture yung mga taong nagbukas ng cameras nila. So, again, maraming salamat po sa muli ninyong pagsama. We know ito po ay part siguro ng bakasyon ninyo at weekday po dyan sa atin. So, thank you so much again. Sir ER, I would send you a separate message po, no, para po doon sa mag-debrief po tayo para mapag-usapan po natin itong experience na to. So, para po sa ating mga participants po sa Zoom at saka sa YouTube, muli maraming salamat po. Magkita-kita po uli tayo sa Lunes, August 30th. And then, again po, itong training program po na to, for you to complete this, kailangan po ninyong i-take yung lahat ng ating 8 total courses po para po makakuha kayo ng completion certificate. So, alright, again.
I didn't get your name, Mr. FilSciHub.
My name is Jeffrey Bunkin po. I'm
Jeffrey?
Jeffrey Bunkin. I'm a Filipino scientist po based in Houston, Texas. I'm a chemist by training. Ako po ang president and founder ng FilSciHub.
Wow.
But we've been operating this non-profit organization for I founded this in 2012, but we've been at our most active since the start of the pandemic. Talaga pong nire-resurrect namin yung platform para po meron po talagang umagapay sa inyong mga guro kasi kailangan niyo po talaga ng mga makakasama sa journey na to, like more like quite badly. So, ayun po. So, hopefully po makapag-ano po tayo. Makasama po namin kayo sa mga susunod na events. So again, thank you everyone. Mag-ingat po kayong lahat. Stay safe and
You too.
kita-kita po tayo sa Lunes. All right. Thank you po. And then so yung Google yung nandun po sa nandun po sa chat box yung link para po dun sa Google form. And
Hindi po mabuksan ang link.
po.
Po makakapag-join sa link.
Sir, wala pa po yung sa link.
Ay, nasend ko na po kanina. Ito po. Hindi po nakikita sa chat box. Ay.
Sir, pati video ko po, hindi ko mabuksan, sir.
Hindi po mabuksan ang link.
Ay, hindi po siya mabuksan? Siguro po, punta na lang po kayo mamaya din sa YouTube. Sa Facebook account namin. We'll post po the link. We'll post the link there po. Punta na lang po kayo sa Facebook account namin.
Thank you.
Okay po.
Thank you.
Maraming salamat po
Again.
Saan po kami pupunta?
May Facebook page po ang Filipino Science.
August 30 is the next.
Thank you po.
August 30, no?
Alright.
Okay, is the next.
Thanks
Okay,
everyone.
bye-bye.
Thank you po, Doc. Thank you. God bless everyone.
Sir ER, I'll send you
Thank you,
the
everyone
link.
po.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.